All right, thank you, Ingrid. First of all, today we're going to talk about enterprise FinCrime detection on the Lakehouse framework. Quick raise of hands if you're thinking you'll walk off the room and be able to implement the FinCrime for your respective financial institutions with the code ready. It's kind of like a sinusoidal wave of this session. The session is structured where we talk about business, we tie it back to the technology, we switch over to the tech implementation, deep dive on the code. We move back to a business and then tie it back to technology and repeat, right? Joined by me, I have a pleasure to introduce Deepak. My name is Surya. I am the field engineering team from Databricks. Please feel free to meet Deepak, and he's going to kick off on the presentation.
Ready. Thanks, Surya. Thank you for sharing the stage. This session was meant, to be honestly, led by Surya completely. He was kind enough to have me on stage. So why are we here before the drinks, right? So I will do my introductions, but that will be the number one question we'll answer. Then we'll talk about what we have done, right, so far towards the why. And then we'll talk about the how, which is what you can take away a little bit with some examples, right? I agree with Surya, it's not going to be a session where you know everything about financial crime compliance and how do you get it rolling right off the bat, right? So a quick introduction on my side. I'm currently leading the financial services practice for Tiger Analytics. I've been in the data analytics ecosystem for the last 20 plus years, worked with several leading global banks, extensively in the area of risk management and compliance, including financial crime compliance. We'll talk about what those banks are as well, but pleasure to be here. We'll get started. It's a small group, so we are open to you interrupting at any point, raising hands and answering questions if a slide has a content which is exciting to you. So happy to hear your thoughts there as well. We will kick it off with the why question, right? Most of you are aware the why is not Deepak or Surya. The why is the regulations on the left side, right? So this is an area, financial crime compliance is the hottest in the banking financial services sector, and it's the most global of them all, right? So there are all kinds of regulations, but this one by far is global. So whether you look at the US Patriot Act or the EU AML directive, or in Canada or in Australia, or even like last year, my daughter, when she was doing a project with United Nations, they were talking about financial crime in Cyprus, right? Teaching them to 11, 12-year-old kids. So it is prevalent. So that's the main reason we are here. And what are the implications and complexities associated with regulations, right? It's not going to be a big lecture on regulations here, but the complexities are known to all of us, right? So there is clearly a global framework which we have to align on. The regulations differ depending on what geography we are talking about. The big part is high cost of compliance, right? So that is now in billions of dollars for some of the large banks. It is in billions, right? So used to be hundreds of millions. Now it's tracking towards large global banks, billions of dollars. And the bigger thing is the cost of non-compliance is even bigger, right? So that's the balance everybody has to deal with. So that's the largest complexity we are going to talk about. And again, the other part of why we are talking about financial crime compliance in a data analytics and AI forum is because all of this requires lots and lots and lots of data. Earlier also, it was the case, but now with AI, a lot of AI integration has happened in these processes. So we'll talk about that as well, and how you can leverage some of the data and AI tools to deal with the regulations. So that's the why part, first thing we wanted to get out of the way. Now, going a level deeper in financial crime compliance, right? Whatever is the component you're looking at of financial crime compliance, whether it's customer due diligence, or screening, or transaction monitoring, or investigations, right? We have kept the flow very high level. Irrespective of the part you're dealing with, there are challenges associated with it, right? There is huge amount of data, as I said, but equally important, there is lots and lots of manual processes, right? So if if a bank is under a regulatory issue dealing with financial crime, someone like a HSBC or a TD or whoever it might be, they have tens and thousands of people, literally tens and thousands of people doing a lot of these processes manually, right? So they are dealing with data sources in 40, 50 different countries from 60, 70 sources. They are dealing with knowing for commercial banking, investment banking, they're knowing the entities to let's say, knowing the right source for each data. All of that is fairly complex when it comes to customer due diligence, right? So knowing different data sources, right source for each of the element of financial crime compliance you have to deal with. When you're doing screening, how do you match the entities you're doing business with the entities which are in sanctions list or screening list? All of that is again data consuming or manual processes as well. When it comes to transaction monitoring, there are other challenges, right? You might have all kinds of models to identify suspicious activity, right? So that suspicious activity leads to like tons and thousands of false positive. No matter how good your models are, these activities are so low in their incidence or event rate that you deal with all kinds of false positive, and again, a manual process comes in to decision all those false positive. So there are a lot of these issues in these processes that we have to deal with when we are talking about financial crime. I'll not go into all of it, but what is happening rapidly, and the good thing for us is with the technology evolution and emerging technologies coming in, there are a lot of repeatable processes and automated processes that you can leverage to deal with a lot of these challenges. So we will pick a few examples of what those capabilities are that you can insert into your business process to deal with some of these challenges. So that's the context here. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Surya to talk about a few of these processes and how we are handling this.
Awesome. Thank you, Deepak. So thank you for setting the how. Quick show of hands of builders and engineers in the room. Awesome. This slide is dedicated to them, where we actually talk about why you're doing the work that you've been asked to do. So FATF, which is a Financial Action Task Force, lists about 40 such recommendations to be done. And what I've highlighted in red, sorry for the blur, it's the bigger screen here, but it highlights why you do customer due diligence, because it's one of the recommendations that's done by, is asked to be done by the FATF, right? The real challenge is there are 40 plus of them, and each of these, if you get audited by an external auditor, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, they pretty much spend about 18 months digging into your systems, right? So they spend significant time within your organization looking into all of this. By the way, I took this from, the source is not visible here, but it's actually published by the Tokyo Stock Exchange. So they do a fantastic job listing all of these, and some of these slides are actually taken from them. So now we have the business problem, right? Why we are doing customer due diligence? Because it's a recommendation from FATF. Once you have that, how does it map to different solutions or technology, right? You can use any kind of a framework to do this, and we will slowly map it why it makes sense to do it on a Lakehouse framework, right? And then we can throw in or top it up with AI, right? Hey, it's 2025, you have not spoken the word AI yet, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit, but you're doing anti-money laundering, or you have transaction monitoring systems, TMS, very popularly known, is to do and meet certain FATF compliances processes that you see on the right? So this is how the overall mapping does. Then comes the BSA, right? Any global banks? Raise show of hands. Any global banks in the room? Okay. So this is very interesting, because in the next slide we're also going to talk about an end game, which is recently being a challenge. And what does BSA does is it basically penalizes the financial institutions for non-compliance. So please note, FATF was recommendations. BSA is compliance, right? So we're not going to get into this, but what we are looking at is filing suspicious activity report at the time of account opening, Who asks you to do that? Why are you doing that? It's because of the BSA compliance, and there are implications when you do not do it, right? So one is more about prescription and recommendation. The other one is adherence, right? So we are slowly trying to bring that differentiation about these banking foundations or financial institution foundations and why it is important as well, right? So a typical anti-money laundering detection workflow looks like this, right? And why is it important for you all to understand this is it is powered by a data intelligence platform. And what does that mean is you can basically make it extensible. This is the same framework which will help you not only meet those recommendations but also being compliant, right? And there are two schools of thought based on jurisdictional data storage requirements, and we'll talk about that in the next slide very, very soon. Show of hands where you run into jurisdictional data requirements day in and out. You cannot move this data from this region to that region, so I see a couple of hands coming off. So that's fantastic. So this is the idea. You take the intelligence platform, you take the code, you build once, you can take the code around, not the data. So if you have built a model in a region, in a jurisdiction, you can take that anti-money laundering or ML with those weights and basically containerize it, Dockerize it, and deploy it anywhere else, and vice versa. What it powers is cross-learning of the model, right? You cannot move the data around, but you can take the model and its weight and move it around different geographies so that it learns from each other, right? This is how you build a robust system. An example, when you travel international, you probably have to call up your respective credit cards or institutions saying that, please allow this transaction, or they ask you for the first cross-jurisdictional transaction, right? But the fraud or the anti-money laundering that happens or the FinCrime that happens does not understand jurisdiction. Your code and model should need to understand that, right? So that is the critical difference. Now, just double-clicking on one of the others, which is the Basel III pillars, which is pretty much developed by the Basel Committee and the BCBS team. And it has very important three requirements that we stress about. And there are so many, but I'm stressing only on the three because it piggybacks on what is called as the Basel III endgame. Have you guys heard about the Basel III endgame? Fantastic. And that actually it's a very interesting schools of thought that comes into the picture where whether the financial institutions are powered enough to support SMBs or small or medium-sized businesses to issue or grant a loan versus the capital requirement and its implications for all of these financial institutions once the loan is approved. That is the math that basically goes into each of them. So there is an EU regulation where I think Tiger Analytics has a well-curated solution around it. We'll talk about that. Deepak will stress on it in the few slides. But what you're looking at pretty much is the standard calculation of risk-weighted assets, the total of Tier 1, Tier 2, what's the buffer that needs to be there for GSIBs, and so on and so forth, right? So this is standard, but why we stress upon it is the Basel III endgame. Have you guys seen the movie Bank of Dave? All right, so this slide is inspired by the movie called as Bank of Dave. That basically covers your Basel III endgame in that hour-and-a-half movie. So if you get some time, you want to relax after the long day, do watch it. I did not use the word Bank of Dave, I said Bank of Brave. But yeah, that's essentially highlights key aspects about the Basel III endgame and why the bigger financial institutions pretty much cannot approve these loans. And there are requirements of these small banks where they don't have the need to have the securities listed and submitted to have the valuation and then approve on the capital requirements and so on and so forth. Awesome. Now let's get into, so that's the business context, right? Let's get into the solution and the technology. We're going to run through these slides really fast. We're happy to move off stage and answer some of these questions. But we're going to talk about the 7 pillars. Hope time permits and we get into some actual implementation and deployment considerations. We do have the demos as well, but I think we don't have the audio-video playback support yet, but so We'll talk about that. Happy to show you the demo as well on the Databricks platform and how it works. Let's talk about pillar 1. So if you look and remember the data intelligence platform for the AML, this is the Databricks data intelligence platform for the entire stack. Notice the things that we have in yellow. Those are the things with the Databricks as a capability powered by AI. Now, if you just look at suspicious activity report, it is by regulation that you cannot use automation systems to submit the SAR. It has to be a human who needs to look at it. However, you can power that human behind the screens with the technology. That's the rule, right? So why we are talking about this is almost like your tax submissions. It cannot happen automatically. There has to be somebody who is authorizing and digitally signing your tax and you submit it. It's very similar to that. So when we talk about that is the critical aspect of it is the first one, the data layer. Deepak pretty much mentioned about how you have 70 to 80 systems coming all together. But what I am stressing here, and you probably have seen this a gazillion number of times all throughout the day, but what I'm highlighting is what actually goes in every layer of the medallion architecture, right? So if you are ready to start off this project, what should be there in the bronze layer, what should happen in the silver layer, and what should happen in the gold layer as a recommendation or a best practice, right? What sits in the bronze layer and for what reasons is mostly about governance, the lineage, and it will all tie up together in the next slide where you will actually see how you will implement some of these at the bronze layer and what schema definitions, what are the core data model implementations that has to go in, and what do you recognize, how do you maintain quality at the silver layer, and finally publish something called as a customer risk profile as a data product in the gold layer, right? So this is a sample example of how you could put together. Now, since we have captured what goes where in the medallion architecture, now let's look into the processing component, right? So we looked at customer risk profile. But let's do a double click on what does a risk data system looks like? What does it encompass, right? So you have all the different types of data sources, the operational systems. Can anybody take a guess what are typical your operational systems sitting today? Most of them, it's still mainframes, believe it or not, right? Nobody has dared to touch the accounting systems that's running for centuries, if not decades. Decades is still old. Yeah, so that's where it allows you to create what we call it as the authoritative data source, right? So the creation, curation of an authoritative data source is super important, and that's where the fundamentals of a risk data system, before even you publish a customer risk profile, starts to evolve, right? Then questions about federation versus ingestion come around. What are those technology tool stack? How do you bring the data to connect to your on-prem systems or mainframe systems and ingest that data into the cloud and do rest of those data processing at scale, and so on and so forth. External data sources is also getting into what is called as a central data repository. I call it authoritative data source. But the part of the curation is just that little cylinder at the bit in between. The rest of the components is where you will actually spend the most of the time, and those block sizes actually highlight what goes behind these, right? Can you tell me in the last 5 years, what is the most popular external data source for a financial institution? SAP, watch list, awesome, yeah. What else? Dun & Bradstreet, okay. Yeah, interestingly, how many of you have actually done return of the goods that you have purchased as no longer needed? That's an interesting external data source. I want you to spend 30 seconds thinking about the example that I've quoted, how that is implying on FinCrime. It's a huge area where all of this are actually coming together. The data sources, external data sources are getting very, very interesting very fast. The future, however, is going to be agentic systems. Exactly, right? So give it a thought and why this diagram is important. Now, and hence comes the term about unification, right? Unification becomes reality suddenly very soon, very fast, because you are combining 2 or more than 2 types of architecture patterns. And this is why you are actually able to meet more than those 40 plus recommendations within the same architecture. So unified architecture is the key word, not unified data. Good luck building a lake where you're trying to bring all of your data at one place and then try to build a system around it. It's almost impossible. It's impractical. But you can have an architecture that powers that, right? So that's the key. Now, just looking into the compliance implementation part, we looked at FATF, we looked at Basel III, some of these BSA compliances, and so on and so forth. Do you guys know you can actually automate the process of validation of these SAR reports? So whenever this goes to FinCENs, they provide a schema definition, the XML XSD schema definition for you to validate whether whatever you're doing as a submission for your SAR is actually right or not, right? That capability, good luck building that on-prem, right? Because you just don't do it once and you're right at the first time. You iterate over it, right? Very similar to your tax submissions. How many of you right the first time after doing it for decades that, yes, I'm confident that I made the submission right? Almost less than 50%, right? So you do this exercise. That means repetition, extensibility are key for your architecture and all these compliance implementations. I have my own GitHub link outside. We could go to search for on my name, and you will see the entire implementation of it. I'll probably give you a glance of it, and also the Python XSD where you can validate, which is published by FinCEN on the SAR activity report when you submit it to the FinCENs, right? So this is all available for you. So that's the QA side of things. Now the most important thing, which ties back to slide number 5 that I was talking about, where an external auditor comes in and audits you for 18 months, right? That's a typical timeline. Do you know why a majority of the time is spent? It's spent in giving that auditor access, right? I can see smiling faces. It's a very practical reason. And that's where the Unity catalog and the governance comes into the picture, where we talk about all of this. Now, guess what? If the auditor finds out that you do not have enough data protection or fine-grained access control or the ability to do lineage, right? So this is what Databricks brings onto the table. We talked about Unity Catalog and governance, but I'm trying back to the practical reasons why this is important for you as a financial institution to implement, right? Now, I want to pivot back a little to Deepak and what Tiger Analytics have a ready-made recipe about MLOps and model governance.
But before we go into this topic, I'm going to just put a thought on the previous part, right? The data aggregation part has been the single largest reasons why most of the penalties and fines have been levied, right? The auditors, the regulators, they are looking for your processes of submission. If you're not able to explain how you got this loan number or this submission or this activity and map it back to the complete process, then there is trouble, right? And depending on what is the category of bank you are, whether you are a GSIB or a category 1, 2, 3, 4, the regulatory requirements obviously differ. The heightened standards come into play. I'll not go into any of that or all of that, but obviously that's the reason this is so important. What we are going to touch upon in the next 5-7 minutes very quickly is an emerging area of, again, heightened regulatory compliance requirements, which is model risk management, or now with AI, it's also AI risk governance, right? So the fundamental pillars of model risk governance are still the same as they were defined almost 14-15 years back, right? Which is your SR 117C guidelines, right? You want to be able to validate the input data that you've used to build your models, whether it's your financial crime compliance models, AML models, whatever suspicious activity models, the input data that was used to develop the models, to the approach that was used to build the models, to the next step of validation of those models to see if they're performing well or they're performing as expected, right? So depending on the type of model, there are different types of metrics you're supposed to monitor, whether it's sensitivity, stability, all of that. So that's the third area, right? The validation of it. Then before you are doing the implementation, the testing of it. So there is a whole framework around it, right? So that has not changed. What is changing rapidly is the number of models that are coming into play, and also the types of models, they are changing completely. Meaning 5-10 years back, all you would hear about is a logistic regression model to whether it's detecting fraud or cross-sell or upsell to acquisition, all of those were simple models. Now we are talking about AI models, vendor models. They are complete black boxes. Even the developer of those models don't know what they have built when it comes to LLM models, the hallucination and all of that. Hence, the model governance part of it has become all the more important. So increasing number of models, increasing complexity of models, and the third thing is your ability to even measure a lot of these things on the left, right? The conceptual soundness, meaning how do you trust a model is very hard. An AI model, all kinds of firms are struggling to figure that out, right? So that's why it's again becoming very important and relevant, and it's a very hard problem to solve, right? So that's the reason we are going to spend a little time on that. And with AI governance, same principles apply. It's just that it applies on the AI models, right? But AI models also have existed for 10 plus years, right? Gen AI models might not have existed for 10 plus years, but AI models have existed as well. So that's the context of model risk management and AI risk governance. The second piece we are going to talk about is, meaning I covered some of it, right? And I think now the right side of it is also becoming a lot more important, right? The transparency and explainability, it is all the more important in banking, financial services, where bias is an issue, or meaning again on AI governance you have heard a lot of this as well. So that's again the business challenge. What we have done in collaboration with Databricks and obviously with some of our clients is a solution which is completely built on Databricks environment. It's a brick builder solution now, which has been deployed with some of our leading clients, again leading financial services firms as well as some non-financial services institutions as well, which does all of those 5 or 6 things we just talked about in an automated framework, right? So when I talk about automation, right from your ability to ingest the data from, again, the Databricks architecture or whatever you might have in your environment, bringing it to the Databricks infrastructure, let's say bringing those models into that infrastructure, to bringing the data into that infrastructure, all of that has been built on Databricks environment, including, let's say, the observability of those models, right? So meaning whatever metrics you are measuring, all of that. And what we have also done is codified what we know typically happens in financial services space, and not at the highest level, but depending on the type of models. So there are close to, in a bank, even retail bank, there are going to be like literally 150 odd models for a mid-sized bank, right? Fraud risk models, credit risk models, AML models. So depending on the type of the models, the metrics that are needed to measure might be different. So we have codified a lot of this into the platform as such, which is on Databricks now as well. I'm going to not go into the detailed technical side of it, but again, if you look at the architecture, it does cover a lot of those circles that we talked about, and each box of it is, and by the way, even for this, we have a demo available. You can join us at Tiger booth, but for each box, we have a component which addresses that, right? Again, built on Databricks, whether it's the governance side, whether it's the workflows on how do you route these models, whether you are designing the security systems around it, all of that is available on Databricks platform as well. I'll come back to you, Surya, if you want to
Yes.
cover. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Deepak. So that's about like a specific solution overview on implementations on what could be covered now. Once you have implemented, once you have auditors, you've given them access to data and everything else, what else they are interested is pretty much about the model auditability and explainability that Deepak was talking about, right? So it's very important that you and your organization start looking towards Python-based models very fast, do the sensitivity overlay analysis that is required, but the most important bit is model auditability. And when you're asked, what they are looking at specifically is, do you have an A/B testing framework, right? Or how do you do A/B testing? How do you launch these new models or many more models as a blue-green deployment? And how does the user adoption looks like? And why does a particular model was used? What was the performance of these models? Yeah, you can have models with large weights, but what's the point if it takes a long time to detect FinCrime over a moving data stream, right? So all of these. Very interesting, and this is the area where I'm actually looking deep, is what is called as regulatory documentation, right? Pick any financial institution, the biggest challenge they have today is auto documentation, right? And this is where a lot of promises from AI has been made, but the reality is the format, the structure in it needs to be done is very fixed. So model and AI services can curate or create something that doesn't exist. That's the biggest risk and exposure to the bank or a financial institution. So this is where you could do, and I'm looking at certain products out there in the market, some of them like Valid Minds and all, they're doing pretty good job, but Databricks believes in an open framework like MLflow. So if you are creating some things around or innovating in your own streams about auto documentation, do take a look at MLflow and their APIs. The faster you can integrate, the whole ecosystem can completely be documented automatically, and it'll be more and more deterministic than probabilistic. So I would encourage everybody to look at open source MLflow and tie it back to those APIs that is already available. Awesome. So this is some of the examples how I have to blur some of those, but you can see how frequently you can do some transaction monitoring, what's the precision and recall rate looks like, what's the frequency they are interested in, how many trials you have done before you launch a particular model into production, and so on and so forth. So those are key matrices that are required for you. Now, specifically talking about performance monitoring, what exactly do you need to monitor? Right, from a business and solution standpoint, what are those KPIs that you should actually be building a framework around monitoring, right? And how frequently you should monitor it, right? So some of the things that I've listed here is like a daily frequency, and what kind of alerts you need to put into your system when you're building this whole architecture on Databricks and data intelligence platform. There are some mandatory ones which you will see some compliance metrics, right? What are the filing timelines look like? When was this last submission done? What date? And so on and so forth. What is the quality score of your data? What is the data certification process looks like? Those are some of the things that you should be actually monitoring as part of your KPIs. Of course, on the RWA side of things, risk accuracy, and so on and so forth. Now, guess what? The solution doesn't end there, right? What we are looking at pretty much is what I started talking about, where your operational systems are and what they are. You're looking at some things, what we call it as extensibility of the solution that you're building together. You should always make sure that your solution is open source, not black box. When we say open source, that means there is open APIs to be able to talk to them and external systems that you could push this data out, because the reality of the matter is wherever you build, you probably need interoperability between your on-prem systems and the cloud. So the systems that you're using or the APIs that you're using should be very much open source friendly to make that happen. Awesome. So while based on our experience at doing that at some of these financial institutions, I'm trying to share some of these deployment considerations. Something that I want to quickly touch base about is some things on which is mandatory is your resilience and disaster recovery. So the systems that you build could be active, passive based on the system and the compliance. The last thing we want is you're getting audited and your systems are down, right? And you do not have a BCP-DR in place. So that's the last thing you want to avoid. And the other thing I also am especially interested in is on the CI/CD process. You did the model development in the cloud, you have the weights, now you want to retrain it or tune it with the data that is available on-prem. So you cannot take the data on cloud, but you can take the model and the weights to the on-prem and again retune that, right? So there has to be a continuous CI/CD process. We look CI/CD process from an aspect of very much doing end-to-end on the cloud or on-prem. But what I am looking at is going between on-prem and the cloud, right? So the compute exists somewhere else, the data exists somewhere else, but you can take the code and the model and its weights and try to tune it in your own on-prem systems and so on and so forth. So some of these things I would say are key, but what I'm highlighting in this slide is don't just think about the data and the code's recovery, but now also start looking about the metadata replication. Because without that, how would you traverse the lineage part of it? What is the original system? What was the operational system? And what was the external data source? All of the metadata also needs to be replicated on-prem for jurisdictional requirements. All right? So that's where the key aspects are. With that, we are almost at 5 minutes to concluding this session. Any final thoughts, Deepak?
Just one thought, right? We covered a lot of ground, from highest level of regulations to certain challenges in financial crime to some repeatable components, right? But none of this applies to any bank or any financial institution as is, right? This is just frameworks and in some cases repeatable frameworks and repeatable templates, all open source. All of this has to be customized to your own situation, your own challenge. And I think the beauty of it, what Surya also mentioned, is you can have a starting point versus having to build from scratch, which is a much difficult problem to solve. And also there is something which has proven to work with some of your other peers, and hence you can feel a little bit comfortable repeating it for your own bank, quoting to the regulators that, hey, here's what some of my peers are doing, we are replicating some of it to ensure compliance. With that, we'll take a pause. Any questions? Happy to answer. I know we have 5 minutes now, but even after that, over a beer, over a drink, we are happy to continue the conversation.